Nyeba gunle namdole shing yenden gunge genbambo semjen gunge nyen jiko tamje kenla gun chaense omeni ye yenge podane dusum sangye gunge ngoni ransem chego ngosuma dense be sawe lame shabla so waende 정말 담비체 냠술렘비 꾸누상보 니중기 삼바당 장주비기 셈 살다비코니 담비체 rum비체 퇴바당 삼베코니 냠술렘브르슈.
Please start by giving rise to pure intention, that of renunciation and the mind of awakening, thinking that right now in this Dharma session you're going to implement the Dharma teachings into your practice by means of studying and reflecting on the teachings. And then in that spirit of renunciation and bodhicitta, please listen to the teachings.
대안드니 가상 공도 슈바나신 나랑 럽종 장기유 삼비 삼바sam지 마임발 라신 심진 탐지 타르바당 탐지 케미코방 토비체둘라 똑비체디 랑귤레 끼그거레 덴데 똑비체디양 규 룽기체라 되삼제발라티니 중기여바인디 디니 룽기체델라 되삼기거니 냠슬링기여 돌드나 따디 진다잠지 마임벌 최딘지인 삼비 삼바티 도스니드니 도삼시로 나은스.
As I have explained in the previous session of the teachings, this is not just a mere class where we study something, but actually what's happening here is that we are engaging with the Dharma of scriptural transmission by means of studying it, reflecting on it, and through that engagement with the Dharma of scriptures, we're actually realizing the Dharma of realization. We are arousing that, can say, Dharma of realization in our mind stream. And so what's happening here, as I have already explained, is not just a mere class, but actually we are practicing the Dharma. We are accomplishing the Dharma in this class by means of study and reflection. So us studying, us reflecting on the teachings equals a real practice, a real accomplishment of the Dharma. So please regard then this 1 hour as a real Dharma session of your practice.
대안드니 규당 낀 문사기 수남당 상제 장섬라 소베기 몰람당 두제 카딘라 테니 다주기 밀리톱 담비 최단 테 대안드니 담비 최 지당 잠지 마임발 대과침부 동아 순주기 최딘데 년규 중바당 삼로 당규 중바티 하장기 공부임바 도당 덴체 남는 망보 송여래 딘두다 ngaran 딘데기 고갑 라바티야 시라기 까바 상보인 딘데 고갑 상보딩이 톨라 당기미 비주 야부지 당기인 삼비기 셈라 가와당 디니 팡심 즉 다대 고갑디 톨라 당기미 셈베 팡심디 니디 유에디 개좀버래 팡심스나다 비주 야부 마당나 디 톨라도 그래 삼비기
what we need to realize here is that we are extremely fortunate. There's a lot of causes and conditions had to come together in order for us to be in this situation that we find ourselves right now. We have this precious human life. And not only that, on top of that, we have met with the Dharma, we have met with quite accomplished, realized teachers, and we haven't met just any Dharma, but we have encountered the Mahayana Dharma, and specifically there, we have met the teachings belonging to the Sutra vehicle, but also to the Tantric vehicle of the Mahayana. And that's extremely precious and really, really rare for that to happen. So please spend a moment just acknowledging that and appreciating your own situation, how truly, uniquely special it is, how fortunate we are. But that's not enough. On top of that appreciation, we need to have that kind of commitment, determination not to let the situation go to waste, to really take advantage of it, to use it for our own well-being and the well-being of all sentient beings, which I forgot to mention previous message. Khenpo said that we're really here going to accomplish the Dharma in order to bring oneself and all sentient beings to the state of liberation and state of omniscience. Right? So we're not going to let this precious opportunity go to waste. What a loss it would be. We need to really understand that it will be an extreme sense of loss if we really have this precious, rare opportunity and we will just squander it. So with that sense of kind of appreciation, sense of understanding that what a loss it would be, and joy, then we need to continue in this Dharma session.
Lubin Shivalaki Junju Nangla Maransu Gewa Dubi Kokap Tang Gewa Dubdu ki Samba Seti Chitang ni Hachang ki Komboji Imbatang Tini Lakwardu Tende ki Lodi Yunrumbuji Ni Tukumares Peshana Karesana Munak Tinrum ki Nangla Lok Gyuwa Nashinchires Tutu Tungtung Chila Meba Chato Watang Tini Jungwatiang Shidaji Kombujire Sumare Petendela Shayore
Shantideva in the Bodhisattva Charyavatara, in English, the way of the Bodhisattva, has explained that this type of opportunity that we all have, and not only opportunity, but really just a thought of accomplishing the sacred Dharma, is extremely rare. He likened that to a flash of lightning that appears in the dark night and doesn't remain for too long, right? Just like a flash of lightning strikes for just a moment and then it's gone. That's how fleeting and how rare our thoughts of practicing the Dharma are.
Ta kanshik shuvar chawe chudi simgi rangshin Wesal de ngowadang de cheletang de debula sopa kandi yimenti pedang rigbala sopa gume dume koni tenla pabe ki shung Gyud Lama tingi shube kabre
Right now, in these Dharma sessions, we are studying the text entitled the Uttaratantra Shastra, or Gyud Lama in Tibetan, that ascertains, resolves the luminous nature of our minds. It shows us, demonstrates what is the essence of of this luminosity, what is the function of this luminosity, what is the result, the fruition of this luminous nature of the mind, and it resolves that luminous nature by means of analogies and reasonings, like different examples.
다데 인디 개침보 징아주 가ring에 고 그랬으나 Gyud Lama lobjong jang sedu jejati karire sena ngarang ki tata ngarang la yebe ki detuk dang korte dang tultul tamje ki shizadu kyube ki salri ki danyi jengi sem seji ngarang sula yebare ane ngansu nga sekinti zugu de tartuna dila zugu yore dende indu Gyud Lama lobjong jang sedu samlope chila matang bachini susu dada detu ki shiza gyube salri ki danyi jengi semse korangi muni di kariredu seyadi anzu lobjong jangi yore di samlo di shirage ke chumbuchirela yani yangdo samlo dus tangko yore.
There's one really important, crucial point that I want to make. What is the main subject matter of this text, of this treatise, the Uttara Tantra Shastra? What we're really studying here is not something that abides outside of ourselves. The subject matter is not some kind of topic that we can really understand, that's something that lays outside of our own minds. What we're really learning here and accomplishing is the nature of our own mind, which is the ground for all the pain and happiness that we experience ever in all the lifetimes, which is the foundation for both samsara and nirvana. It is the ground of our confusion and freedom from confusion. So this nature of the mind, which is aware and clear and luminous, that's the main subject matter of this treatise, right? Again, we're not going to learn something that is like a topic that we can learn, which is something that's different from ourselves. But what we're learning here is our own nature of the mind, which is clear and aware, which is the ground for all the happiness and suffering, confusion, samsara and nirvana. We're learning how this mind is, how it truly is, what's the nature of it. So please remember this. This is a quite important point that I'm making, and please bring it to mind over and over again that this is the main topic of this text.
제 랑준 dorjeki 차진기 몰람 나라 덴데지 숭여래 다케 넘바 기규 나게니스 돈다디 규는 디그레 지제 인지민지 규고 말해 나양 심라 동양 심인데 개경 심라 투양 심라 도양 랑기 심 개경 심라 가경 심인베 저도 탐지 심라 쳐버쇼 숭여래
Khenpo gonda di shloka di kerang jingduge di number shloka gi ajang machik tanda tegi
안기 디 나탄다 땡기 민도 다 돈다 다오디 낭와세데 두서 심라 두거레스 동바세데 도서 심라 두거레 송바레 낭동니부디 깨가 니부세데 두서 심라 두거레스 데니 게 춤부치디 툴세 긴 코르바데당 돌세 냥데 니부디야 ngarangi tata simdila tukdeyore. Dende yinbayindi, nganzu chwe chebe kapsula rodo che kugoyore, rodo tamche di simge tengdila dini chobachi kugoyore sumbare.
Tamadi semlara tugiyoruz. Jotok tamche. Okay. There is a shloka, a stanza in the Mahamudra Respiration prayer that's uttered by the third Karmapa Ranjun Dorje, which says, appearance is mind, emptiness is also mind, realization is mind, confusion is also mind, birth is mind, cessation is also mind. May we cut through all doubts about mind. Stanza number 14. So, exactly as Ranjun Dorje has stated here, everything is the mind. All that appears and exists, something that we can experience, all of this comes down to the mind. But so is the true nature of all appearances, which is emptiness. Emptiness is also mind. And realization, whatever we can realize, accomplish, that's the mind. But also confusion also comes down to the mind. Birth, cessation are not separate from the mind. And so the aspiration here is that may we all cut through all these kind of doubts and really misconceptions, Jotok, misconceptions about the mind.
Deyang ko dewaje na tordi na semse di ngowa dan rangshin di ngoshe bai na nyangde chakwares. Semgi ngowa rangshin dan namba dinzu ngoma she bai na ane korwa chakware mato dini da korwa dan nyangde nyegi santam dabudi dindi chila shaku gweresini mambu sung yore.
To put it easily, something that we can really easily understand, the main point here is that whenever we recognize the nature of our mind, that's nirvana, that's freedom from suffering, going beyond suffering, that's nirvana. When we lack that realization, when we fail to realize the nature of our minds, that's samsara, that's suffering. So the threshold, the dividing line between samsara and nirvana comes down to whether or not we recognize the nature of the mind or not. And this is something that's stated over and over again, right?
Dini nganzu namgyu semdela ngowo rangshin tukche sini sum dabuji yore sumbare. Da dinzu chidang nganzu zowadi chajin zochen la sobe kapsuni gom gyaptang dabuji rimbare. Semgi ngowo di tongba yimba. Semgi rangshin di salwa yimba. Dini da tukche segire torduna tarduki niluk di ngowo tang tongba tang rangshin salwa nyeba diyang chosu lunga ma yimba tongshindu salwa yimba tang saishindu tongba yimba di sungjuk tongba dila tukche segire. Da desumde hago na ani dolwarela desumde ha mago ondi dini tulu yungu yore suni. Da dela nganzu tanya tatang dila dini ngo tongbala chugus rangshin sawa la lungus an tuje nazo la chugus ni kanda da chugu lungu chugus sumga di susu simgi ngo rangshin tuje sumgi toni dubgu gare se chi da dindeki rimba dindi yore.
In the traditions of Mahamudra and Dzogchen, we have 3 stages of meditation on the nature of the mind. Those are meditation on the essence, nature, and compassionate energy. So it is explained that the essence of the mind is emptiness, shunyata, that grand openness, in other words, where the nature of the mind is luminosity, is clear light. So what about the third one, the compassionate energy? The compassionate energy is this unity of the first two, of the essence and nature. We can understand it when we need to understand that the compassionate energy is that unity when we don't fall into either extreme of just following essence, which is emptiness, and forgetting all about luminous nature, or when we just falling into extreme of grasping onto luminous nature and kind of leaving aside the empty essence. So when it doesn't happen, when we don't fall into either extreme, when we really realize that while essence is empty, it's still luminous. And while it's luminous at the same time, it is also emptiness. They are not distinct. They are unfailing perfect union. That's the compassionate, all-pervasive energy, the third point that we meditate on. So when we really realize that, understand it, that's liberation. When we don't realize these 3 points, these 3 stages of meditating on the mind, we still remain in confusion. And we also use specific terms, terminology, when we come to describe this essence, nature, and compassionate energy. The terms, I will utter them in Sanskrit, also in English. So the empty essence, the first one, is known as Dharmakaya. That's Sanskrit, known as the body of truth, you can say, of Dharma. The luminous nature is Samkhagakaya, usually translated as the body of enjoyment, if you will. And this all-pervasive, unstoppable, compassionate energy, which is the unity of the first two, that's Nirmanakaya, the emanation body. So these 3 kayas, 3 bodies, is really the nature of our mind. Well, the nature, sorry, I shouldn't say nature. That's how our mind is, right? This essence, empty essence, luminous nature, all-pervasive, compassionate manifestation. That's the 3 kayas. That's how our mind is. So we should, right? That's how we can meditate in the tradition of Mahamudra and Dzogchen.
Tande nangla tini shidang, lamdang, dribu chasang di yongsu dzogde yobare sungbare.
In this, the ground, the path, and the fruition already perfected, mastered.
Tangi di shugwe di karichini shugwe sana kasuba be Gyud Lama choja sedu chidang ni chila samgyuk tang mogo bachini susu simgi kola lobchung jangi yu sambe samlo tang goya chidang tini simde layang chidang lobchung jangdang mangbo yore pena tokche tongme nganzu uma tang tsema laso lakbar tu tsema tang ngomba laso ba kapsu layang simla lobchung jangdang yore simjung zo sim saya dawo tang tini tsema tsemingi lo saya dawo tiji yore ine yang tanda nganzu Gyud Lama kapsula tini tinde mayimba chini tsukudida te sumgi nangni simgi rangshin jidwa simgi rangshin wasawa sayadi tini ngowa karire, gyu karire, jile karire ti kandis ngondu chigo gore telan dipje ki dima kari kari yore dima di pongje ki nyembo kari kari yore sine chasang di tanda shungdi nala rinpa shinuma ti yungu yore tinde yinba di ta tordu na simla lobjong chayong du changdang mangbo yobe nani simge rangshin wesal sayadi tartu ki nilu di ane nga zu lobjong changi yu sambachi simla den di shirake chumbare di chini nge di shugu yu.
Why am I mentioning all of this? Why am I explaining all of this? Because the main subject matter, the main topic of these Dharma sessions is not something, again, that can be pointed as being outside of ourselves, but rather we need to point inwards. What we're really studying here is our own minds. And there are many ways in Buddhism to study our mind. right? Our mind can be described as being conceptual, non-conceptual. There is a tradition of the middle way, Madhyamika, that's to say, Pramana, right? That's epistemology. All of that also explains the mind. Also, Abhidharma has a lot of teachings on the mind, how it explains the mind, how it portrays the mind as the main mind and the mental factors. And we can also describe the mind as being valid cognition or being not valid cognition. So there are many different ways to really study the mind when it comes to the Buddha Dharma. But here, in the context of these Dharma sessions, among all these different ways, really what we are studying here is exactly this luminous nature of the mind. Among the three, remember the essence, nature, and all-pervasive compassion. Among these three, what we are concerned with here is the second one, the nature of the mind, which is luminosity. So that's what we're going to study in detail. Step by step, we're going to look at what is the cause of that luminous nature of the mind. What is the function of that luminosity? How can it be actualized? What are the stains that cover it? What are the veils, right, that will obscure that luminous nature of the mind? What are the remedies that can unveil that luminous nature of the mind? So all of this is gradually being demonstrated in this treatise. So again, among many different ways of studying the mind, understanding our mind, here we are concerned with the kind of really ultimate way of being. How is it truly, finally, at the last kind of way, we can say ultimately, how our minds are, right? That's what we are concerned with here, and that's the main subject matter. That's why I explained also these different ways of the mind's essence, nature, and so on.
Tini ta manzu nyamlen je yongdu sanje ki shirchin ki dogin nangla tini sanje ki ka ta nganzu namju ka kholo rimba sum gyorwa ka kholo rimba sum chasangi dunda toto dawa di nganzu countries nyamsu lingu gure sungye re sene laba ina degi rimba nying jebu chi sungye re tsik dine tsik dup chigi nangla dati kandi sungye re sena sem la sem machi te sem je rangshin wesa bao se digi nangla tini nganzu sangi ki ka chasang ki tunda dodo tang tetsamji mayimbar tekwa chimbo donga yongzo ki tunda nyingbu dawa tang te gorim di ani tsikdub de nangla tsangbe kone sumshayare di shira ki nge di pe gechumbare nge di kolan dodu ji shugi.
When it comes to the Buddha's words, the Buddha's teachings, they were, you can say, the Buddha's teachings come down to the three turnings of the wheel, the three times when the Buddha turned the Dharma wheel. And the meaning of all the teachings given in all those three turnings of the wheel can be summarized by just one sentence. I find this sentence, which is found in the Prajnaparamita Sutras. I find this sentence as really extremely beautiful and very important. So it is said that, the Buddha said, Prajnaparamita, as for the mind, there is no mind. The nature of the mind is luminosity. That's one sentence summarizing really all three turnings of the wheel and really all the Buddha's teachings be condensed in just this one statement. All the sutras and tantras. So it's really, really crucial. That's why I'm going to explain it a little bit more.
다 직디 나라 돈다 숨여래 돈다 당보디 가르에서나 셈라 숭예들에 니바디 셈 마치데 스니 숭예들에 디니 숨바디 셈예랑신 웨살바오 세 돈다 숨 숭여래
This one statement has three main points. The first point is the first part of the statement. As for the mind, that's the first point. There is no mind. That's the second point. The nature of the mind is luminosity. That's the third point.
다 이나야 대숨가라 셈 세주래 셈 마치 셈게랑신 스니 숨가디 셈게가니 샤고도와
But you see, in all three main points of the statement, there is one word present, one topic. That's the mind. Again, to repeat that statement. As for the mind, the first point, here there's mind. There is no mind. Again, we have that mind there. The nature of the mind is luminosity. So in all three aspects, we have this one term, the mind.
당한수 낭바지이나 당보 셈세 딜라 삼로타에 디시라게 개춤버레 계란기 셈세디 케랑투 놀린제투 나 데니 남백이 최 실람데 숨당 생아치 레듐데 코로안양데 차상라 삼로타에 쉬어레 다 셈세디 자와니니 놀린제 마둡세고르베 삼로땅 마둡나 드니 최기 자와 생아지 레듐데 탈반양데스에 대한 미기지 컨셉트 오지 마도 뭐 예수 임발라 니시게 시작하라고 그래.
If someone is a Buddhist, for that person, the mind is really important. It's really important to understand what is meant by the mind and really accept that you can say this mind. Because if a person, a Buddhist, really understands and accepts the mind, then the person will understand all the teachings such as karma, cause and effect, past and future lives, samsara and nirvana, right? All of this can be realized and understood if one, sorry for the wind, if one accepts and realizes the mind, really understands the mind. On the other hand, if someone like being a Buddhist but somehow really is not concerned with the mind, right, doesn't know what it is, not interested in it, doesn't accept it, then one is kind of like denying really the root of the Dharma. There's no way for that person to, to really realize the teachings, such teachings on liberation, karma, past and future lives. Of course, the person can still think of about those things like a concept. Oh yeah, past and future lives, karma, cause and effect, right? Just taking it as a concept, but without really understanding and accepting the mind as it is, for that person it will be really impossible to give rise to certainty, right, about the real state of being, how things truly are, that kind of certainty will not be possible if one, first of all, does not really understand what is the mind.
Tindu nganzu nangba ngoni tsingi tang tenpa tang nangba ngoni chik chako tu tena ani sem se di chik samlo tanya tang sem se chik yore se di la ishe kye tang tabshe kandri chini da ishe kye kukudu se ni samlo tanya di shiraki nega chabo shire sem ke malina teni shiraka kabo yungre sem di yoba ke lang na tse nga chi legyumde taba tamche chasangdi 즉 삼로 땅서 주요래 시다고 주요래 근데 셈케 말했나 근데 시점에 봐 차르고도 와디 시라깔 가고 용 그래.
If someone wants to be a genuine Dharma practitioner, really like a proper Buddhist, then one has to understand what is meant by the mind, really give rise to certainty about what is this mind, how this mind is, and at least at the very beginning be concerned, be interested in in how one can give certainty, how can one gain certainty about the mind. Okay, maybe not the certainty from the beginning, of course, but just even interest in developing that certainty about the mind. That's really important, because if one does not accept the mind, one doesn't really, yeah, when one does not, we can say accept, find a better word for now, one doesn't really accept the mind, then there's no way to really fully comprehend such teachings as past and future lives, karma, cause and effect. There will be no foundation for realizing those teachings. Like if one doesn't have certainty about the mind, there's no really kind of ground is missing. The main ground is missing for really understanding and realizing all these important teachings of the Buddha Dharma. So it's really important to think about the mind, being concerned with what is it from the very beginning.
디인두 상계계양 랑기 셈니 용수들 디니 상계 템바인 숭바티안드니 다 딘데질로 공네 숭바인 서와.
That's why the Buddha himself has famously stated that, and tame one's own mind. This is the teachings of the Buddha. Okay?
셈세디 ngaranzu miki jiso chire jiso minda yore ngaranzu gyapchunggi dini bakcha minda ba yore di indi ngaranzu zambuling din nangla samlotang ba ya jiso kashe nangla semdir tangboni yosha dawachi dang sem yore sebetela ijila kange meba dawachi dinde yore ya jiso kashe ki nangla ni gyamchung kaga imba indi 아니 숙부암 레발레 로스교베게 셈세지 켈라일라 딘딘디니 칼레카보드니 용스바레.
When it comes to this topic of the mind, we all come from different cultures. We all have different backgrounds as the students of the Buddha Dharma. And that can really affect our understanding, our approach to this topic of the mind. Because in some cultures, from the outset, there's no really question about is there a mind? It's a given, right? There's absolutely no doubt about the mind. It's just kind of like all pervasively accepted in that culture, in that background. But some of us come from very different situations. We have different backgrounds, different culture where body and brain is something of a given, but the mind, this ephemeral mind, is not something that's accepted as being existent, right? So there people can have a little bit more of difficulties kind of wrapping their minds about around the topic of the mind.
다 셈세 디 따용도 값을라 따당이 요래 삼도 따용도 즉 from the intellectual point of view 따야지다 아니 또 즉 from the experiential 라고래 emotional point of view 따야지 용도 와
This semra
되니
ranla di chik nidu
셈라
choyul
라오 셈세디 라오 셈세디 요래 요 말에 가르레샤스니 삼도 땅땅기 고다고 니 용도 와 다치당 니가 비주 땅초 그래 에 되니 이내양다 가르쳐 그래 티 주지 안수 emotional so 그래 experiential point of view 디 또스 비주 마 땅와이나 셈당 또스 타 녀버도 차기도 와 되니 티 주지 다 가르쳐 그래 rational 스네 민도 intellectual 미기 때바이나 양 셈세데 또스 objective 더 차이 차도 그래 딘디 또스 타 링어서 저긴서 더 버셔래
So when we think about the so-called mind and what is it, how is it, there's two ways to go about it. Well, generally speaking, that's how we regard the mind. We could regard it as something intellectual and rational. That's what we think the mind is. Or we can say like the domain of the mind is more like this experiential, emotional way of being. And both of those two ways can be referred to as the mind. This kind of rational way of being, or this kind of when we feel something, when we experience something, we can call that the mind. So both okay, but actually, if we think that these emotions and feelings and these experiences, that's what the mind is, then it's something more close to us. Like it's something more like, right, subjective. We feel like, yeah, the mind is like this very close to me. But if we describe the mind as being this kind of rational mechanism of intellect, right, then mind right away is something further removed from us, like something, this objective thing, sort of, right, this rational machine, let's say. So there's these two ways of going about, of understanding what the mind is, and they kind of result in these two different experiences for us.
만족이 셈디 간데지도 스니 따지다 따용도 따사기 렌스다 어디 디니레스라 그래 through the lens of intellectual and through the lens of the emotions 란나 되기도 와 되네 삼로 니 따에도 와
So when we ask ourselves what is the mind, and we examine that, we really try to analyze that, there's this two lenses through which we can regard the mind. This first lens of this intellectual rational lens, and the second lens is this more experiential kind of emotions-based lens.
당하데 니가 지당 고기열에 이내양 당고디다 the intellectualism 다 근데 깡바게 양 깔락하고 이래 아니 갈래 젤라디드니 수수기 지 뇽소르스나민도 수수기 지 난기지 inner genuine 지여와 디니 삼땅 바이나 디니 렐라바다오지 용그래
And we need both of those lenses to examine the mind, to approach this topic of the mind. But I think if we just, from the beginning, we just kind of only regard the mind as this intellectual, rational operation system, only that, right? If we only kind of use this lens, then it will be difficult class. It will leave us with some kind of difficulties. I think it's really, from the beginning, it's really kind of good to di dampone yana jema
당고
natsuki
디
inner di.
디스 intellectual 디 베저 당르바 아니 갈레라 수수기 뇽소 디 베저 슈크체 바타나 야가요.
Yes, sorry. Yes, I clarified this. So it's okay if we, in the beginning, sort of use this lens of approaching, the mind as this intellectual, rational operation system. But it's not okay to just leave it there, and that's all what we think about the mind. Slowly, we really need to understand and relate to the mind as this kind of the inner experiencer, the feeler, right? Not only this thinker. Sorry. That will be really good for us to slowly move to that second kind of using the second type of lens, that domain of the experiencer, the feeler of the emotions, and not just this rational thinker.
드니 다 디디 nganzu chiso mindawa nangla tanye daminde yundu tisu nganzu kejeshe di kalekhabodo yungudu pena semgi kola kejeshe yundu taji pena nganzu mind labe dawada awareness se dawada tinzula ta tozuji reta di nganzu pena nganzu nangbe ki sem se da tini da kenambe nupcho gyakab ki mind se dawada chi thought se dawada emotion se yan tinde ki chi tinzula nganzu tisu chi kangen dawa chi tegidwa ko tanye di tozu chi beje dang tinzu tata chi yungume di tindi kenamba ki nambe shung lobchong jangdu dang tinzula yan tozu samlo tanggu kore.
And so, as we come from different societies, we also use different terminology, right? Different language in these different societies. So we sometimes, well, in English, we say the mind, awareness, and we really need to understand that what the Buddhists mean when they say Sam in Tibetan, the mind in English, might be different from what in the West we say when we say thoughts or thinking or emotions, right? Basically we need to bridge these different terminologies that's being used in different cultures, in different societies, like the language usage, right, could refer to slightly different things. So here, in the context of these teachings, of this Dharma session, right, we need to think about this, that perhaps when we hear mind, it might not mean what we used to. So we need to kind of study a little bit these points, really, to be aware of them.
팅팅이 다 아주 the technical problems 거라 되게 가시지 용시 바래 근데 인데 디기 되니 수수 the translation kyangpala matin bachini ani pena nangchu ke nangni semki ngo semki ranshin sem sidi Quran rangi dishi kyaptan shorwa di khande chile tashi kyagi dusin di chi hago ache di neka sawachire di man yang kapka la parla ngazu tata chi goda ma theba tindi mango yongu do ati indi ken namba shung du zulo lobjon chandu tinzula tunang nai di kechumbre
shung shen de chikra lobjon che gal chambo
chidang ngazu shung chandu da dinang la di tanye du zu yongu ba di lamsa da susu gyursha gyo di hago song sunis matsim barchini Quran sogi tanye digi da tsingi dan tunda di ngoni di karijila sem segi du sendi lobjon chanye di kechumbre do ba.
So we might run into these kind of technical problems. So what happens is that when we study the texts and we come across this kind of terminology, the mind, awareness, we see these words, let's say in translation into English or our own respective language, and we might right away feel like, oh yeah, I got it. I know what it means, right? Kind of, I grasped it. But this could be determined by our own tendencies and backgrounds and cultural predispositions that we have. So we shouldn't just right away leave it there knowing like, oh, I know what mind means. We need to really try to understand what the Buddhists mean by the mind, by awareness. So for that, we need to study. We need to really understand what are the characteristics, what are the definitions, what are the functions of those terms. So it really requires some of our own search, analysis, and study. Not just reading translation and right away thinking, oh, I have totally grasped all of this, right? Kind of translating that into our own previously informed understanding. So we need to open up and try to understand what the Buddhists mean by those terms. So that's something we need to be concerned with and really kind of study those terms as they come in the Buddhist scriptures.
라서 데니 땅 아주 단지 숨여와 셈라 셈마치디 셈게란신 외사와 숭예디 나라 간데치니디니 산지게 까콜로 숨보디 dü기레스난 셈라 세데기 까콜로 당보긴 주자디 템바레 숭바레 셈마치데 세두 까콜롬 바르바긴 주자디 템바레 숭바레 데니 셈게란신 외사와오 숭두 까콜로 타마긴 주자 닝부디 템바레스 딘데 인두 주제 왕도 삼로타나 딘나라 디숨긴나라 까콜로 숨가게 림바디 창대요레 숭바레.
Now going back to our statement, which incorporates the teachings from all three turnings of the wheel of the Dharma. So as for the mind, the first part of the statement, that really incorporates the subject matter of the first turning of the wheel of Dharma. There is no mind. That's right there is the main subject matter of the second turning of the wheel. The nature of the mind is luminosity, and that points out to the essence of the third turning of the wheel. So meaning the teachings of all three turnings are therefore included in this one statement.
데니 다 디칸데레스나 템바 줌린테기 까당보 덴시 최고 숭배 값을라 동알기 템바디 시작가와를 두고요레스나 셈라 두고요레스 군중기 템바스디 가르레 셈레스 람세디 가르레 셈라 차데요레 셈기 연된라 람세교레 셈기 꽹기 차들라 군중세교레 꽹기 차라 때니 중샤베기 동아들라 동아세교레 네 고비 템바스나 가르레스나 셈기 연된 탐 꽹탐 지데 메바 차송와들라 고비 템바세교레 세디다 셈라 세디 덴바 시가데 차상 셈기 까니 샤바체다 셈기 까니 둥알땅 군중데 빠니 람라테니 고바톱고 예바송자 까당부 덴시 추고르기 던다데양 셈라 세티나라 düde바레.
Well, if we look at the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, known as the four truths of the noble ones, or the Four Noble Truths. So you see, right there, everything the Buddha stated about the Four Noble Truths really comes down to the mind. The suffering, the first truth of the suffering, well, the suffering is the mind. It happens in the mind. The origin of suffering, that's also the mind. It comes down to the mind. It actually, origin of the suffering equals folds and downfalls of the mind. The third noble truth is the truth of the path. And that again comes down to the mind, actually to the qualities, enlightened qualities of the mind. right? That's the path. And cessation, well, cessation is the removal of the faulty aspects of the mind, which is the origin, right? And the result of those faulty qualities of the mind, sorry, I say faulty qualities, sorry, the removal of the faults of the mind, and it's the removal of the result of those faults, of downfalls, which is the suffering, the first noble truth. So you can see that in this way, really the all four noble truths really come down to the mind. So we abandon the region, which is the faults, the defects of the mind, thereby also the result of these defects, the suffering in the mind are abandoned. And it's done by relying on the qualities of the mind, which is the path. And as the result, what is realized is the cessation of those faults, defects of the mind. All four noble truths, you could see everything really refers to the mind.
Ta dini nipa sem machi te se dig nang la ka barbe ki kongden di sungbare kandere sena ka barwa shirchin geding du sun ki tunda tin todo sena che tamche ranshin matu pam tembar matu pam dini suni namjen ki bardu chube che tamche tongni yimba che la sungbare de indu sem machi te sungdu da chidang chiru ki yul dinzu ranshin matu pa yimba mase dende yul sharken tang token tang sharse ki shi semde yang ranshin matu pa jere sudu torduna total tembare toni tembare de indu tini ka barwa ki tunda de dusini sem machi te set nala dude bares.
The second statement, sorry, the second aspect, the second point of the statement is there is no mind. That refers to the teachings of the middle turning of the will, the teachings on Prajna Paramita, the transcendental perfection of wisdom. Actually, all three versions of Prajna Paramita literature, the extensive, the middling, and the concise teachings on Prajna Paramita, can all boil down to the statement there is no mind. What it's really, what the Prajna Paramita teachings explain is that all phenomena are not truly existent. They are not real, they are not solid, they lack inherent nature of their own. So by all phenomena, we literally mean everything, starting from any tiniest form up to and including omniscience, Buddhahood itself. All of that is emptiness. That's the Seshunyata. But Prajna Paramita doesn't teach that only these external objects lack the inherent nature of their own. Also, the mind, the one that realizes those external objects, the one where these external objects arise, the one who cognizes the external objects, all of that, that's the mind, right? The experiencer. That mind is also inherently empty of its own nature. It's not real, it's not solid, it's lacking conceptual elaborations. You can say it's emptiness, it's freedom from all mental constructs. That's what is meant by this second point of the statement, there is no mind.
Tini ta tamadela sumbadela semge rangshin wesalbawo sumbare de sungdu ta de nala ka thame ki gongden di chasang di dude bare sumbare kandere sena ta ona chi yuryang mebache nang semyang mebache deni dende ki meba tsam di tardu ki nilu rewe sambi simbatin tokbe chedula deni semge rangshin wasal sedi yungure dende ki tongba di chik dinrup kak samji ki tongba chanje maimbar tongba dila yundin ji yores tongba dila nyuba ji yores di gar res na wesalwa re sungni ta dordu na namgun chodin ki tongba ni segir dindila o dindir ten shaba dila kari sungo res na dini ta ka thama ki kongden semgi rangshin wesalwa sungbare
Die Khenpo tama di namkun ra.
namgun namba kungi chodan tembe tongni dendrup kasam ki tongba changje maimbar dorduna dendre ki tongni dila yundenji yore sungbare
As for the third point of the statement, the nature of the mind is luminosity. That condenses all the teachings pertaining to the final turning of the wheel, the Dharma. So, in the second turning of the wheel, we have resolved that all outer appearances are emptiness, also the inner, the experiencer, the mind is also emptiness. But is that all? Is that the final way of being? This the no outer experiences, the mind is emptiness, that's all? That would be a really extreme type of emptiness. It would be this bare nothingness, and it's completely wrong, right? To have this kind of emptiness that's just one-sided, like a vacuum, like nothing whatsoever. That's not how truly things are. Like in this ultimate sense, it's not only emptiness, but it's emptiness endowed with all supreme qualities. It's actually a technical term, like how in the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, emptiness is described again. I'll repeat: emptiness endowed with all supreme qualities, such as the qualities of luminosity. Right? That's the qualities of luminosity that are present right there. So it's not like empty, like nothing, but there is this supreme enlightened qualities that's inseparable with emptiness itself.
teni ta de sumga de ngarang su semla jani samla tangba ina tae yore kandere sena ngarang su ki sem de la namba ji yore sungbare aspects teni ngowo ji yore sungbare teni rangshin ji yore sungbarwa ta ti samlo tangtu pena nganzu dangbo semla sidu ta chidang ngaranzu nyumong tang nyembo chasang ti semrawa ta ngaranzu da dosha kebay na ti semki namba chigre deba kebay na ti semki namba chigre tindu ti semki namba re semla sedi teni sem machi te sedi kapsula semki ngo di kar resena tongba nire sungbare ti semki ngo tembare teni semki rangshin di kar resedu semki rangshin wesa wao sedi teni indi ta te sumbo di ngaranzu semla tsu jani samla tangba na semki namba semki ngo semki rangshin sedi ta tende chigla sungi gwalin chogre.
And the statement that we have been looking at, as for the mind, there is no mind, the nature of the mind is luminosity, is really explains everything that we need to know about the mind, its aspects, its essence, and its nature. So, as for the mind, the first aspect of the statement, that really says that there is mind. Because when we experience any type of afflictive emotion, let's say strong desire, attachment, that's the mind. We can't deny it. As for the mind, it's there, it's kind of there. But that's not the true essence of the mind. That's just the aspect of the mind, what we call this kind of appearing aspect. Okay? It's a surface. It's a part of the mind. This kind of desire, attachment, any other afflictive emotion. That's as for the mind. But in reality, there is no mind, right? Because in essence, all those afflictive emotions are also emptiness. So yes, they appear, that's the aspect, but in reality, in essence, they are emptiness. But is there, that's all? No. In nature, there is also this clear light luminosity of the mind. So you can see that the statement, as for the mind, there is no mind, its true nature's luminosity, really explains all the different ways of the mind that we can approach it. It's kind of fleeting partial aspects. That's the first aspect. Its true essence, emptiness, and its true nature, luminosity.
Teni ge chumbu chik di digi kare tingi yoresana. Nga su chu nyamsu lendang gom kyabtang ki rimba di tembare. Lam ki rimba segirwa. Ta di nala rimba chasang di dui de bare. Kande resana. Sem la se di rimba tangbo. Sem machi de se di rimba nipa. Ani wesawa se di rimba sumbare.
And what is really important about this statement is that it demonstrates the stages of our own practice. Like, how can we really meditate on the mind? How can we practice this path? Everything is giving, all the instructions really on the stages of meditation on the mind are giving in this statement. As for the mind, that's first stage of meditating on the mind. There is no mind, that's the second stage of practicing the mind, and the mind's nature's luminosity, that's the third stage of us meditating on the mind.
Ta digi kare tembare suna. Nga su kerang lobjong changi yone re. Gom kyabki yone re. Ta dedante su nga su chu kare chituku yone yang. Di rimba sum ki nang la sha chuku yore. Ta pena tangbo nga su kare tam dedu ki tsawa tultul yakdu chasang di sem la tukwa re sha. Soken di sem re tu la. Nyongken di sem re sha. Sani di la ngishi ki kukudwa. Di rimba tangbo re. Tene rimba nipa di dendre nyongken dan sheken ki sem kwarang ya ngo rangshin matu pare seda hakwe di rimba nipa dire. Tene tama de la dendre ki semba de yang tongkyang tsamji mayin par saldong sungju yinba la goa lebe di sumba re. Ta nga zu lobjong jana ya nyamlin jeba ina re gom gyabe kapsula chidang rimba mangbo yorde kanda chasang de rimba di sumki nangla shangni trochogo shak tupkire la nga zu gom gyabe rimba di duksu trogo kuye sumba re.
So what it really demonstrates is that whether we study the Dharma or we practice the Dharma, that's to say maybe we are meditating on the Dharma, it really we will be engaging with one of these three stages. Like, there's no way to avoid these three stages that I have just elaborated on, right? So if, for example, we are trying to understand this kind of source of our pain, of our discontentment, of our confusion, or maybe we're trying to understand what is the foundation of our happiness, well-being, we're dealing with the mind, right? What we are doing here, we are understanding that the creator of all this pain, confusion, but also the creator of our own well-being and true happiness is the mind, right? That's the one who experiences all of that. So if we are really meditating or studying that, we're dealing with this first stage. But perhaps we right now at another moment, we're dealing with the understanding that actually the one who cognizes all of these phenomena, experiences of pain and pleasure, the one who experiences all of them, in reality is emptiness. It's like really not something solid and real. Then what we're doing, we're really practicing or studying the second stage, right? That I just also outlined. And at the end, when we are concerned with the unity of luminosity and emptiness, when we understand that it's not just mere emptiness, but it's also the perfect unity of luminosity and emptiness, then we are engaging with the third stage of the Dharma. Whether we study it and just try to understand, or maybe we're practicing, maybe we're meditating on these teachings, whatever we do, really, whenever we're concerned with the mind, we can't really bypass these three stages.
Ta di indi digi tsik di simla simmachi di simji ranshin wesaba sayadi nangla ka kholo rimba sumga chasang dui di yoba di ngaranzu tuyasam gumsum ki rimba diyang chasang di nangla chang di yoba dini ngarangi tata simse korang di namba dang ngawo ranshin kare yimba diyang chasang di nangni samlo tangyo yoba ta dordi na chasang di chik di nangla du samlo tang tu bayi na di nga zu yin na da chi lobchong chang na nyamlin china chik tok tok da wachi nga zu yin na chik fundamental framework da wachi di nangla shak tu bayi na pe ya go yore di ma to nga zu lobchong mangpo chang ani ta neka da wati kawa la chik pap kuku yoba di nga rang zu yang ha ma go ni kange teki dwa ta di sum di yakpo lo la nge ba chini dini lobchong chang ki yone re chi kshimba kari chigi yone yang di kawa kapsu re sha sune ha go ni nyamlin che tu bayi na tata tu tu go yore di yang tangpo di nyamlin che tangpo la kala kangsam chi ngi sheki na nyi pala tu dini sumpa la tu tu bayi na tata chung go yore.
So whenever we study, reflect, or practice the Dharma, when we meditate on the Dharma, when we're putting it into practical application, right? We really we are dealing with the mind, with the essence or nature of the mind. So we can say we're engaging with any of these three stages, right? The one that I just outlined. So these three stages, as for the mind, there is no mind. Nature, mind is luminosity. It's really a fundamental framework for anything we do in the Dharma. Maybe we're just learning the Dharma, receiving the teaching, studying. Maybe we're reflecting on the meaning, gaining certainty about the Dharma, putting the teachings into practice. Whatever we do, really, we need to understand that this is the key point. All the Dharma really comes down to these three stages, right? The essence, the nature of the mind. Like, really, this is the crucial main points. And if we miss these key points, we might study a lot of teachings, we might practice different meditations, but without these key points, we're going to not gain a lot of results. Sometimes when we don't really progress in the Dharma, we wonder why. Well, it's because we are missing the main crucial points of the Dharma, right? We spread all over, but we're missing these essential aspects. So it's really important, therefore, to kind of progress gradually from first stage. We start by engaging with the first stage, understanding how is the mind, what is the mind, and we move to the second one, what is this empty essence of the mind, and from that we gradually move to understanding and realizing the third aspect, which is the luminous nature of the mind.
Dini ta nga zu danda pe na Gyud Lama da wacha sha na teti sumgi na ni nga zu kare ko la tso lobchong jangi yore se na sumba dire semgi ranshin wesal yimbi yindang di kandi chire dende wesal di kandi chini gyudang ken kandi chik tene nga zu ngundu chiku gore se di danda nga zu Gyud Lama di na la lobchong jangi yore sumba di yimba songsa ni nge kele ken nambali shue de ani di chini shue bayin.
And so in our treatise, that's the Gyud Lama, the Uttara Tantra Shastra, the highest continuum, what we are engaging with among these three stages of study and practice, it's the third one, right? The third stage, that is the luminous nature of the mind. So what we're learning in this text is what are the causes, what are the conditions for us to actualize this luminous nature of the mind? How can we really bring it to manifestation? So that's the main kind of subject matter of this treatise. That's why I spent time going about all these things, because I was really explaining what is the main subject matter of this treatise.
Tini ngazu tanda Uttara Tantra se ke Tantra se jorwa Gyu se jorwa odati kare resena dunda dordina di semdele segere semam semgi rangshinam semgi nilukdela ngodela segere de imba yindu tini ta Gyud Lama seni hako warche pala Gyu se ta hako kudu Gyu se ta hako warche pala sem se de ha magona samla matana tini Gyu se de hako kawa imba yindu 아니 ngarangi ta nganzu 당보 sem se de samlo tango ku yobatang tini nipa de la sanje ki tanji sungsha pe ki tsik ta tsikdup de ki nang la ka kholo rimba sumdang tini nyamsile rimba chasang de sebu sungsha pa de nganzu ki chi nganazu nyamleng ki sapta soda wachi nganazu ine chi GPS soda wachi yimba de tangbo lola nge tumna tini nganazu chema lobchong changba ina nyamleng cheba ina nga ti kapsula ti chigi yo ta tinde yin sini yakbo chine totu kuro ba tinde didi yin chi minchi tula nge pa naya di nge chumbare.
Well, remember, the title of our treatise is the Uttara Tantra, or the highest continuum. This word Tantra, translated as continuum sometimes in English, right? Because Tantra has many meanings. And really, what Tantra in this context, as the title of this treatise means, it means the mind, right? That's the continuum, that's the mind. So, in order for us to really understand the Tantra as the kind of main subject matter of the text, because that's the title of this treatise, for us to understand what is meant by this Tantra, Gyu, continuum, we need to understand what is the mind, right? So first we need to understand what is the mind, but we don't just stop there. We need to engage with the mind through these three stages that I explained, the ones that incorporate all the teachings from the three turnings of the wheel, right? What is the mind? There is no mind, it's nature's luminosity. So this is how we're going to understand the mind, how we're going to engage with the mind through these three stages. And these three stages are like GPS, really. It's like a map for the whole Dharma path. So if we're going to practice the Dharma, we're going to study the Dharma, we need to have this kind of map or GPS so we don't get lost. So in the future, whenever we study text or we practice the Dharma, we can check, so where am I? What am I actually doing? Where am I in my path? And we can use these three stages as our GPS to find ourselves in this whole path of the Dharma. So that's how we're going to understand and engage with the mind, which is the Tantra. That's the kind of half of the title of this treatise. So that's why it's so important, right? The mind, again, is so important, so crucial for us to understand, and to understand it, we need to keep in mind these three stages that I explained today.
다 tening anzu semseki ngodi kandiresha sani samlotani komiyongdu tayongdu chowa kenchabu jilebe sungbare.
When we think about what's the essence of the mind, when we're concerned with what's the essence of the mind, it's kind of strange. Yeah? Strange is okay? Is the word here? Get something?
Um,
Maybe better, another word?
mysterious,
Okay,
amazing.
thank you. Yes, I like that more, yes. Strange has a bad connotation in English, like weird. It's not that. Mysterious. Really nice, yes.
The beyond our human rules la war ngala war tanga zu ngaran su ki nyungsor ki timle nangla tsani chik shak ma shekin tindi chik yimba chik tsunang legire isla bare.
The nature, the essence of the mind is really lies beyond this kind of humanly created rules, because these rules are based on our own personal experiences, which are limited. So this our experiences create this kind of like box or rules. But when we really, the nature of the mind doesn't fit into those rules, under those rules, or into that box.
Tati kanjisung yoresana che ranjung to chiki chaji molam ki nangla peche kiran tsena ne tati tsikje angi de haku masu kechi sikdang. Yoba main gyawe kyang masik meba main khorde kunji shi. Galdu main sungju ume lam taral semji chungi tokbar shows.
As the third Karmapa Ranjun Dorje stated, this is the 11th stanza of the Mahamudra Respiration prayer. It is not existent, as even the victorious ones have not seen it. It is not non-existent, as it is the basis of all, samsara and nirvana. This is not a contradiction, as it is the middle way of unity. May we realize the dharmata of mind, the true nature of mind, free from extremes.
Tene ta ngaju tangi rimba sumji shayimba sem tongpa wasal sumbati. Di kandisini ngaju nyamsu lengku garis labdu ani dinangla sebo sung yore. Yul la tebe yulme sem su tong, sem la tebe seme ngowo tong. Ni la tebe nizin rangsar jol wasal semji nilu tokbar shok sayadi ta tangi sanje ki sem la sem ma chite sem ge rangshin wasa wo sungwa ta rimba chiba sungbare. Tindi ta ngaju komti dus komgu ge sungbare.
And so the three stages that I outlined today, the first one is the mind, the second one is the emptiness of the mind, and the third one is luminous nature of the mind. How can we practice those three stages? Well, it's perfectly and clearly explained again in the Mahamudra Respiration prayer in stanza 18. It reads, looking at objects, there are no objects. We see only mind. Looking at mind, there is no mind. It is empty of an essence. Looking at both, dualistic clinging is spontaneously liberated. May we realize luminosity, the true nature of mind. You can see that this is the stanza of verse by Third Karmapa Ranjun Dorje, but it's really exactly the same what the Buddha stated in the Prajnaparamita. As for the mind, there is no mind. Its true nature is luminosity.
Naso ta dering torduina ngaju Gyud Lama se Gyud se di yakoche hakor che bala sem se di ani tozo samotaya dan hakoe di shiraki nega chadigi yoba indi ani nge di sem se kola di dendechini shuba ins.
In short, for today's teachings, we are concerned with the title Gyud Lama in Tibetan, Uttara Tantra in Sanskrit. So this Tantra or continuum in English, this Gyud, yeah, Tantra, continuum. In order to understand what is really truly meant by this Tantra, we need to understand what is the mind. And that's why I have spoken today at length about the mind, the aspects of the mind, the essence, the nature. So, right, we really need to understand the mind in order to understand Tantra, which is part of the title of this treatise.
So
So we stop here for today.
Janchu semchu rimpo che ma ge ba na ma ge gyure che ke ba nyam bara me ba ya gone gondo pel bare sho